Marco Rodriguez stood at the edge of the murky, leaf-filled water, staring at what had once been his grandmother Lucia's pride and joy. The afternoon sun glinted off the stagnant surface, revealing hairline cracks spiderwebbing across the pool's concrete walls like aged skin. A frog croaked from somewhere in the depths. Now the pool's only regular swimmer. $15,000 minimum, Marco muttered, crumpling the fourth repair estimate in his fist. Abuela would understand. When Lucia Rodriguez passed away 3 months earlier, leaving Marco her 1970s suburban ranch home, he'd been touched by her generosity, but unprepared for the maintenance nightmare that awaited him. The pool, installed during the neighborhood's heyday when his grandmother hosted legendary summer parties for the entire block, had deteriorated beyond recognition during her final years of illness. As Marco photographed the broken filtration system for his insurance, a sharp voice cut through the air. "I do hope you're planning to fix that eyesore before summer." Marco turned to see his neighbor, Karen Peterson. Peering over the fence, designer sunglasses perched on her highlighted bob. Her third neighborly visit this week. "Actually," Marco said, forcing a smile, "I'm thinking of removing it altogether, creating a garden space instead." Karen's face froze in a rictus of horror. "Remove it? But that would destroy the historical character of Oakwood Estates, not to mention property values." As she launched into an unsolicited lecture about neighborhood aesthetics, Marco nodded politely while quietly making a mental note to schedule the demolition for the following Monday, precisely when Karen would be on her Caribbean cruise, a trip she'd mentioned no fewer than 14 times since they'd met. "My grandmother loved this pool," Marco interjected when Karen paused for breath. "But in her last years, she couldn't maintain it. I'm honoring her by making this space beautiful again, just in a different way." Karen sniffed dismissively. "Your grandmother understood the importance of appearances. We've been neighbors for 27 years. Did you know she consulted me before any exterior change?" Marco bit his tongue. According to his cousins, Abuela Lucia had privately referred to Karen as La Bruja Chismosa, the gossiping witch, and had taken particular delight in planting bright pink flamingos in her garden whenever Karen had complained about something. "I'll certainly take your concerns under advisement," he replied diplomatically. That evening, Marco sat at his grandmother's kitchen table, surrounded by faded photographs of pool parties from decades past. Smiling faces gathered around a pristine turquoise pool, children splashing while adults laughed with drinks in hand. His younger self was there too, jumping off the diving board with reckless abandon, his grandmother applauding from a deck chair. The doorbell interrupted his nostalgia. Marco opened the front door to find Mrs. Diaz from across the street, a petite elderly woman with sharp eyes and a perpetual half-smile. "I saw Karen bothering you earlier," she said without preamble, handing him a container of homemade arroz con pollo. "That woman has appointed herself the neighborhood queen without election or consent." Marco laughed, inviting her in. "She seems passionate about the pool." "Passionate about control," Mrs. Diaz corrected, settling at the kitchen table like she belonged there. "Your abuela and I used to exchange notes on Karen's latest crusades. Last summer it was the Johnson family's basketball hoop, too tall and attracting the wrong element. Before that, the Singh family's vegetable garden was too ethnic-looking." She gestured toward the backyard. "Lucia talked about converting that pool for years. Said it reminded her too much of your abuelo after he passed. She just never had the heart to do it." Marco smiled, surprised. "She never mentioned that to me." "Well, she wouldn't, would she? You loved that pool as a child." Mrs. Diaz patted his hand. "But she'd be pleased to see you making this place your own. Just be prepared. Karen will not go down without a fight. That woman has reported children for coloring with sidewalk chalk because it devalued street aesthetics." After Mrs. Diaz left, Marco made several calls. By morning, he had secured all the necessary permits from the city planning office, hired a reputable demolition contractor with experience in pool removals, and arranged for a landscaper specializing in native plants to visit once the excavation was complete. He scheduled everything meticulously for the following week, verifying twice that the work would begin precisely when Karen's Caribbean cruise ship departed. The contractor, a burly man named Ray, who'd apparently dealt with his fair share of nosy neighbors, had chuckled knowingly. Marco was knee-deep in paint swatches, debating between Mountain Meadow and Serene Sage for his planned garden pergola when the doorbell rang. The chime was followed by an authoritative knock that vibrated through the thin wooden door. Through the peephole, he spotted 2 police officers standing on his porch. One tall and lanky with a perpetually tired expression, the other shorter with a military-style haircut and mirrored sunglasses despite the cloudy day. "Mr. Rodriguez?" the taller officer asked when Marco opened the door. "I'm Officer Dawson. This is Officer Reyes. We've received an unusual complaint." Officer Reyes removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that held a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "Your neighbor has reported the destruction of what she describes as a historically significant water feature without proper authorization from the Oakwood Estates Historical Preservation Committee." Marco blinked. "The what committee?" "She also mentioned potential archaeological concerns," Dawson continued, checking his notepad with visible reluctance. "Something about Roman bath ruins." A laugh escaped Marco before he could stop it. From across the street, he spotted Karen watching from behind her curtains, phone pressed to her ear. "Officers, I'd be happy to show you my permits," Marco offered, grabbing his folder from the hall table. "And I can assure you there are no Roman ruins under my grandmother's 1978 swimming pool." As they walked through the house toward the backyard, Officer Reyes leaned in. "Between us, this is the 4th call we've had from her this week. Yesterday, it was the Patel family's unauthorized vegetable garden, and Monday it was the Johnsons' suspiciously tall basketball hoop." In the backyard, Officer Dawson photographed Marco's permits while radioing dispatch. "Looks like everything's in order here. City approved this demolition 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry you had to come out for this," Marco said, offering them bottles of water from a cooler. "Not your fault," Officer Dawson replied, accepting the drink gratefully. "Though fair warning, she's already on the phone with someone else. I'd prepare for round 2 if I were you." As they left, Marco noticed a business card Officer Reyes had discreetly left on the porch railing. It read, "Community Mediation Services for when good neighbors go bad." From her window, Karen watched the officers leave, her face twisted in outrage as she furiously dialed another number. Marco could almost see the wheels turning in her mind, searching for her next angle of attack. "It's a disaster, a complete disaster," the shriek carried across 3 backyards. Marco froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips, as he recognized the voice. He checked his watch. 9:17 a.m. on Thursday. Karen Peterson was supposed to be sipping Mai Tais in Jamaica until Saturday. The demolition crew exchanged knowing glances as the gate to Marco's backyard burst open. Karen stood there in her travel clothes, designer luggage still tagged, face contorted in shock as she surveyed what remained of the pool, now just a crater of broken concrete and exposed rebar. "There was a hurricane warning," she explained breathlessly to no one in particular. "The crews rerouted. I took an early flight back and now this." She gestured wildly at the excavator, its massive yellow arm frozen mid-scoop like a mechanical dinosaur caught in the act. The operator removed his hard hat, revealing a shaved head slick with sweat. "Ma'am, you can't be in an active construction zone without my azaleas," Karen interrupted, pointing at a row of pink flowers along the fence line. "The dust is killing my prize-winning azaleas." Marco approached cautiously, permit folder in hand. "Karen, I have all the paperwork right here if you'd like to." "Paperwork?" She spat the word like spoiled milk. "That pool has been the focal point of this neighborhood since before you were born. I've hosted my bird-watching club on my deck specifically for the water reflection views." A small crowd of neighbors had begun to gather at the commotion. Mrs. Dyers from across the street watched with undisguised amusement while walking her chihuahua. Mr. Washington, the retired judge from 2 doors down, shook his head knowingly. "There's no Homeowners Association here, Karen," Marco explained, painfully aware of their audience. "And I've followed every city regulation." Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. She pulled out her phone, manicured fingers trembling as she jabbed at the screen. "We'll just see about that," she hissed. "You clearly don't understand how things work in Oakwood Estates. Some of us have connections." As she stormed off, Marco caught Mrs. Diaz's eye. The elderly woman made a cuckoo gesture with her finger and winked. Marco laughed, but the knot in his stomach suggested Karen's connections might be more than empty threats. The transformation was breathtaking. Where a cracked, alder-ridden hole had once dominated the backyard, a thriving ecosystem now flourished. Native wildflowers swayed in the gentle September breeze, attracting hummingbirds and butterflies. A curved flagstone path led to a pergola draped with nascent jasmine vines. At the center, a small meditation fountain, a subtle nod to the water feature that had once been there, trickled peacefully. "You've created paradise, young man," Mrs. Diaz marveled, running her fingers over the lavender plants that edged the walkway. It had been 6 weeks since the last of Karen's officials had visited. The sudden silence from next door was both welcome and slightly unnerving, like the calm before a storm. Marco had spotted her watching from various windows, documenting his progress with her ever-present phone. But she hadn't confronted him directly since the failed petition. The mystery of her retreat solved itself on a Tuesday afternoon when Officer Reyes stopped by, ostensibly to admire the garden. "Thought you'd like to know," he mentioned casually, accepting an iced tea. "Your neighbor received a cease and desist order from the city last week, filing false reports, harassment, misuse of emergency services. The works." "That explains the silence," Marco said. "That's not all," Officer Reyes continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "During one of her many calls for inspection of your property, someone from the city noticed irregularities with her own property. Unpermitted sunroom addition, non-compliant fence height, expired pool safety certification. The fines totaled over $7,000. The ultimate irony arrived 3 weeks later in the form of a catastrophic mechanical failure. The ancient pumping system in Karen's own neglected pool, a feature she'd defended so vehemently in Marco's yard, ruptured overnight, sending thousands of gallons of stagnant water cascading through her pristine basement, destroying her home office, and ruining an extensive collection of limited edition, Live, Laugh, Love wall art. Marco learned of this development when a soaking wet, mascara-streaked Karen appeared at his door at 7:30 a.m., desperation replacing her usual condescension. "I need your contractor's information," she said without preamble, "for the pool removal. Immediately." Behind her, Marco could see water still pouring from her basement windows. "Of course," he replied, hiding his satisfaction. "I'll get his card." And she added stiffly, clearly struggling with each word, "I may have overreacted about your renovation." Marco considered this the closest thing to an apology he'd ever received from her. The first weekend of October brought perfect weather for Marco's housewarming and garden unveiling party. The entire neighborhood turned out, even Karen, who arrived late with a stiff smile and a store-bought pie, keeping largely to herself in a corner of the yard. Edison lights twinkled overhead as twilight settled. Children played hide-and-seek among the ornamental grasses, while adults lounged on the patio furniture that the neighbors had collectively gifted to Marco. Mrs. Diaz raised her wine glass. "To Marco, for showing us that sometimes the best way to deal with a troubled past is to dig it up, haul it away, and plant something beautiful in its place." A chorus of "Here, here" echoed around the garden. From his grandmother's restored porch swing, Marco surveyed the scene. Friends chatting, children laughing, neighbors who had become like family enjoying the space he'd created. Even Karen seemed to be thawing slightly, engaged in what appeared to be civil conversation with Mr. Washington about pool removal contractors. "You would have loved this, Abuela," he whispered to the star-filled sky. "Your home is bringing people together, just in a different way than your pool parties once did." In the soft golden light of the paper lanterns, Marco could almost imagine his grandmother nodding in approval as her legacy continued, not through the pool she'd built, but through the community that had formed in its absence. "Mr. Rodriguez? Environmental Protection Agency. We've received reports of an endangered spotted salamander habitat being disturbed on your property." Marco stared at the bewildered EPA official standing on his doorstep, clipboard in hand. It was Tuesday, 8:30 am, exactly 5 days after Karen's police fiasco. This marked the 6th official visit in less than a week. Let me guess, Marco sighed. A concerned citizen called it in? The woman nodded. A Ms. Peterson, very insistent. Sent us 17 emails with blurry photos of what appears to be. She squinted at her notes. A common garden lizard with spots drawn on it in Sharpie. Yesterday, it had been the water department, alleged underground spring disruption. The day before, the Historical Society, non-existent Victorian-era plumbing. And before that, the city inspector's office, again, imaginary zoning violations. Each visit ended the same way, with apologetic officials and increasingly thin patience. The harassment escalated beyond government agencies. Marco's contractor reported receiving anonymous emails questioning his credentials. Flyers appeared on neighborhood doors warning about property value destruction, with crudely photoshopped images of Marco's yard looking like a junkyard. Then came the petition. Marco was mulching his newly delivered native plants when he spotted Karen moving door to door with a clipboard and a determined expression. Through his kitchen window, he watched her animated gestures as she spoke with Mr. Washington, the retired judge. The elderly man's face remained impassive as Karen thrust the clipboard toward him repeatedly. Finally, he shut the door without signing. This pattern repeated house after house. By mid-afternoon, Karen's pristine white tennis outfit was wilted, her expression thunderous as she stormed up the driveway of her final target, Mrs. Diaz, the neighborhood's longest resident. Marco couldn't hear the conversation, but he didn't need to. The elderly woman's body language spoke volumes as she crossed her arms and slowly shook her head. Karen's voice rose to a pitch that sent Mrs. Diaz's chihuahua into a barking frenzy. The door closed firmly in Karen's face. That evening, Marco's doorbell rang. He opened it cautiously, half expecting another official. Instead, Mrs. Diaz stood there with a homemade flan. Behind her stood Mr. Washington with a bottle of wine. The Patels carried garden seedlings. The Johnsons brought folding chairs. "We thought you could use a proper neighborhood welcome," Mrs. Diaz explained with a wink, and perhaps some moral support. As they settled in Marco's living room, stories poured out. The Christmas lights Karen had reported as excessive electricity usage. The children's birthday party she'd called the noise complaint hotline about. The unauthorized garden gnomes she tried to have banned. "She's been the neighborhood terror for 8 years, Mr. Washington explained. But this pool crusade of hers, it's united us all against a common enemy." Through the window, they could see Karen watching from her upstairs bedroom, phone pressed to her ear yet again.